across the fence, get ready for a bit of detective work. We'll join a group of students who are tracking a wintry puzzle as they try to solve the mystery of the animal that left these tracks as clues. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. One of the many joys of living in Vermont is seeing a fresh set of animal tracks following a nice fluffy snowfall. The reality is those perfect tracking days are few and far between, especially this year. More often than not, tracks are distorted by factors such as wind, melt, and freeze. But those difficult conditions aren't enough to stop an instructor at the University of Vermont from challenging his students through a course on winter tracking. Rebecca Gollin is on the trail of winter trackers.
But it's definitely... Oh, look at the name. We were basically tracking on a vertical ice rink with trees in it, you know. This is a very unusual pattern.
Mike Kessler doesn't like to say something's impossible, especially to his students, particularly when what they're trying to do actually is pretty impossible.
For many of them, it was their first time tracking ever. So if they had been told or been aware how, quote, impossible the situation was to track, but they didn't know that. And so with a little bit of hope and a lot of inspiration, they went out and did the impossible. Didn't even know they were doing it.
This winter tracking specialty class is an intensive 4-day session offered by UVM's continuing and distance education. Students in it approach their subject in a very unique way.
In this class, we do something that we never get a chance to do the other times of the year, especially with people new to tracking, which is follow an animal for an extended period of time to walk in its footsteps. So we always pick the fisher and the fox, and we usually have nice fluffy snow like we do here.
The fluffy snow falling this day is a bit misleading, since the majority of the class was conducted in particularly icy conditions. So icy, in fact, that Kessler had to do some last-minute adjustments to the syllabus.
We had to invert what we did, and instead of basically following a fisher and a fox, which was not possible, so instead of like interviewing 2 people for 4 days, we took a survey of the entire forest, and we went after the story of this forest and how it exists in totality in the wintertime. And from that story, the students were able to infer or intuit where the fisher and the fox were, and actually moose and bobcat and gray fox and coyote and just everything. We found everything but bear, which is hibernating, and turkeys, which weren't here.
I was anticipating snow for the months leading up to it, but it ended up just being icy conditions, which was definitely a unique experience.
Elizabeth Lawrence has taken several tracking classes with Kessler. While this one did not turn out quite like she thought, she learned a lot.
The subtleties to the tracks vary from each season. Like in leaves or grass, it has its own difficulties in like actually seeing it depending on how the light is hitting and things like that. But in this condition, it's like the ice hardly picks up any tracks. A lot of animals are so light-footed that they could just go right across and there's nothing left. So it's like really needing to seek out where those tracks are and really identifying the difference between like a piece of an icicle that fell off a tree branch, or is that a track? And like it seems like so difficult, but now after 4 days of doing it, it seems like a lot more possible.
I think what we definitely have is more than one animal here. You see, you got this one going through here, then you have these older ones. See these here?
At first glance, you don't really know what it is, but when you really start to look and they say, you're like, no, those are all tracks. Those are all imprints over time, and every one of them has a little story to it. And I really just kind of came over me. I saw like the trails of where the mouse was moving and hiding, and how the size of the rocks were massive to it. It was the size of a huge boulder, and really getting yourself in touch with the perspective of the animal.
It doesn't take very long to learn 10 or less animals' feet and what they look like that we're going to track in the forest. But it takes a lifetime to understand the actual substrate, the earth, in which those feet move.
To get an insider's look at understanding substrate, the class took a field trip to the Snowflake Bentley Museum in Jericho. The connection comes not only because Bentley took many of his iconic images just down the road, but also because of his precise examination of snowflakes and the science behind them.
The intense study of snowflakes for a tracker in wintertime is essential because the manner in which snowflakes are formed and the manner in which they age or melt and compress can help a tracker age things very precisely. Just intuiting the landscape as we have, you get a sense of water here, you know, the water there, the sense of water here, right? And you have topography, you've got vegetation, water, all of the confluence of all those things coming together. We have one thing we didn't have though.
After visiting the museum, the class headed back out for more tracking.
I'd say the highlight of that day was when we lost the trail, and then the diamond in the back, the person in the back, kind of put the mind of the deer on. They want to save energy, so she kind of just had to make a good assumption. It's like, oh, the track is probably over there. That might be where we find it. And we went over to it, and little do we know, we caught back up with it, and that was pretty sweet, getting in that whole mindset.
Kessler says that even after spending decades in the woods, there's always something new to see and learn.
A student was able to discern where a fisher had gone up a tree but not came down. So with the ice in the trees and looking at the trees and tracking the bark, was able to track this fisher through the trees and find the tree it came down, which was about 25 yards from that, and continue the trail. So, you know, when the substrate below is no good, the animals went above, and the student was able to follow that through the treetops and reconnect with the trail, which was just, that was a first. Right here, you can see it's actually turning this way. It's beautiful. You have the gap between the two, the hooves of the deer. The students were right, there was a deer over there, because here it is, and basically a fossil. You have an ice fossil of a track. And then we have these other oval ones right here, and what they know oval are almost shaped like a small ice cream cone with a scoop of hard ice cream on top. Those tend to be your fisher tracks.
I think it was the most difficult tracking I've done, but I feel like with the skills I gained in this class, now I could probably track just about any substrate.
With only their winter gear and their senses, these students are learning to read the story of the landscape and its inhabitants, no matter what the conditions. In Jericho, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
Well, joining me now is UVM Continuing and Distance Education instructor featured in Rebecca's story. It's a pleasure to welcome Mike Kessler. Thanks so much for coming in.
You're welcome, Judy.
Now, in the video, it was noted that you always pick the fisher and the fox as the two animals to sort of follow. Why is that?
Well, it's because normally in winter we do have that nice fluffy snow, and those two animals move about more than any others. Most of the animals are either hibernating or have left, so there's really just a fraction of them moving around. They're there and they move around the most, but in very different ways. The fox like a ghost through the forest, and the fisher more or less like a shark.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, very different.
So how did the students put together the story of the forest?
Well, with all that ice, it was like a vertical ice rink, sliding tree to tree. We realized we couldn't follow the trail, but I asked them to go out and just find anything. And they would go out and find a track of any animal anywhere. We'd come back and put it up on the big chalkboard and send them out again. And what we started to establish was basically dots on the board, different colors, different animals, and establish after a while, with enough data points, we let them interpret and then intuit, where do you want to go next? And they started figuring it out themselves and finding more and more animals. And then basically like a connected dots picture, a picture emerged, say of where, when all the deer moved down into one area, then the next day the coyotes moved in there.
Oh, really?
And then the deer moved out, and so they started to get the story, the flow, that way, yeah.
Is that unusual?
Which part? The ice was unusual.
Ice, yeah, I mean,
oh my gosh, I had never seen ice like that. The ice that came, this was the ice storm right before Christmas. The ice falling out of the trees actually cut my ear. It was big, it was sharp, and as one student said, it was like tracking on a broken plate glass window.
What a great opportunity, and they did it anyway.
Yeah, that was the amazing part. We all do credit to them. They had such great enthusiasm for that.
And so you brought in a picture that I want to ask you about.
Sure.
Tell us about this photograph.
Okay, this picture, this one here?
Yeah.
This is basically a track suspended in midair. The track is in the center of the picture, It's that not quite oval, but that, like I said, is sort of like a little scoop of hard ice cream on a sugar cone. And that's from a fissure that was running, that's a stream bed. The first day of class, we had 50 degrees and pouring rain. That went up and froze. And because the rest of the forest was frozen, we found that the animals, if they could, were following the stream beds, the frozen stream beds. And so as the water went down, it left that track in midair.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so when you say it takes a lifetime to understand the earth in which the animal's feet move, does it mean tracking is not for the average person?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's what I meant there was basically it's like parenting. I think until you've lived a lifetime, you really don't understand what parenting is, and there's always something new to learn. And it's that way with the earth. There's so many mysteries out there that it's almost like every day is a new day. Yeah.
Now, you talked about in the piece the snow and understanding the snowflakes and what kind of snow fell and when it fell, and that can help you age a track that you're looking at. Can you explain that a little bit? Okay,
when we look at those close-ups of Snowflake Bentley's work, those beautiful pictures where you see the feathery effect of snowflakes, as a snowflake melts, it melts from the smallest pieces to the larger. So each vein, like on a feather, on that snowflake, each spire that it's connected to, they all melt in a sequence. And so it gives you basically a second hand, a minute hand, and an hour hand on a clock when you look at a snowflake, all those little features.
And how fast it melts too, but that depends on what the temperatures are.
Right, that's not a constant. So you always have to be intuiting that in your head and constantly. That's where it takes practice, lots of practice, yeah.
And so an example of that would have been in the story when the young man was saying how one of the other students, they lost the track of the deer and said, well, let's see, where would the deer have gone if you were a deer? And you have to kind of think about that as well.
Right. That was what he said, like putting on the mind of the animal. We were, the animals had just as much difficulty moving on the landscape as we did. And so when they thought about that, which way would this animal go, given the trail we've just followed, they reconnected. And that's where the aging of tracks through snowflakes comes in again, because they looked at that track and said, oh, that is basically the same exact time as the trail we were on. Everything matched. The snowflakes, in terms of their characteristics and the degree to which they'd melted, matched perfectly.
So that meant it was the same animal?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Talk about tracking through the trees. I thought that was really interesting.
Okay, that was amazing. We went to that place. What had happened was the student had noticed a disturbance on the tree bark. So looking at the tree as if the way we teach them to look at the ground, noticed that there was a trail going up the tree and there was evidence with a little bit of broken bark on the ice, but it didn't come back down. So being curious, which is the best attribute, you know, there's a mystery, and wanting to really get into it and solve it, started asking questions. You know, if it didn't come down, where did it go? And looked up and said, well, why would it be in the tree? Well, the squirrels were having trouble on the ground, so the squirrels were hanging out up in the red pines. And so it's like, okay, if we're going to be squirrel hunting up there, where are we going to go? And so I was looking at the way the trees connected branch to branch, and then could see, once there was a logical pattern, if you were going to be chasing squirrels up there, how the squirrels would go tree to tree, could then look at the branches from below and the pattern of ice, and there was, I think maybe there was a little dusting of snow, but more or less ice, could see where the fissure was running across based on the broken ice patterns in the tree, and then looked for broken ice on the ground, found the tree where it came down. So actually that was the best part, that confirmation. So went to a tree and saw a track only coming down, not going up. And then, so that was his, yeah, that was just wonderful when he put that together.
And so, talking a little bit about the students themselves, you were really impressed with how curious they were and how well they did under these conditions.
Yes, yes, they were. You know, there was one day where we were in pouring rain for 4 hours, and it was 50 degrees, and it literally was like thunderstorm rain. The next day we showed up, it was almost 20 below zero and 60-mile-an-hour gusts of wind. And some of them, their boots hadn't dried yet, so they were in frozen gear. And yet they had to go out and do the impossible, and it was wonderful. And I had a set of assistant instructors that were just the best. It was the best situation on earth you could have. That pretty much was the summit experience of all the classes, we've ever had because the conditions were just so impossible, and yet the challenge was met. It was wonderful.
Well, Mike offers tracking classes throughout the year through UVM Continuing Distance Education. If you'd like more information about the classes or any others, you can check the website on your screen or call Continuing Ed at 1-800-639-3210. Thanks so much for joining us. It's always fascinating talking with you.
You're very welcome, Judy. Thank you.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.